I want to go back to what you were talking about before in the introduction when you said this movie is a real unicorn. Is also a unicorn in your career, in a sense, stylistically, culturally.
Yeah, I mean, it got, it sort of got made some traction, and at some point, I realized that this movie would never be shown. Well, very early on, I was told this movie would never be shown in Japan, and Warner Brothers was committed because of George and Francis, and Toho Fuji was committed because they didn't want to be they didn't want to renege. But the first week of shooting, it was very clear to me that this would never be shown, and you know, and in some ways, that seems quite liberating. And the other is the opposite of liberating, because you're thinking, if I'm making a movie that will never be shown, the bar for this movie is pretty fucking high, because I have no excuses. I can't say we were trying to sell some tickets, we were trying to put some fannies in the seats, we were trying to do something commercial. No, none of those apply. The only thing that applies is we were trying to reach an artistic bar. And so that the pressure I felt of making the film was even stronger once I realized that it had no commercial life.
Glass. The structure itself is very in debt to the literary part of Mishima, and you had the rights from his estate, which was his widow at the time initially, and then they kind of got back on what they were willing to give you.
Well, I knew I had to get into the books because that's where a writer really lives. And God knows Mishima had a very flamboyant life, but that's not his life. His real life was his work. And Madame Mishima, as she preferred to be called, owned the books. And Francis came out to Tokyo and wined and dined her and sweet talked her. And finally, we got her permission, but she withheld one book, which was Forbidden Colors, which was his only overtly homosexual novel. And so I had to work around that, and I asked my sister-in-law to read everything he had written, see if we could find what we were looking for. And there was a book called Kyoko's House, which was 4 novellas. And one of the novellas was about a failed actor who falls into a sadomasochistic relationship with a dominatrix. I said, there it is. That's what I need to find. So I had my Forbidden Colors novel. Of course, when Madame Mishima discovered that, in fact, we were going to use Kyoko's House because she just assumed it had never been translated. It still has not been translated. She just assumed we didn't know about it. And so that's when she began her rather strenuous efforts to have the film canceled.
But it wasn't.
What?
It wasn't.
Well, so I have this Japanese producer, Mata Yamamoto. he has an anime company, and he put his company on the line. It's about $1 million. And I bring in Francis. We're still trying to swing a deal. Francis says, I think it's time to bring in George. So Warner Brothers is at that time. Francis has been saying, George has been saying bad things about Warner Brothers because he didn't like the way they had released THX. So he goes to Ted Ashley and says, I'd like you to make Mishima. And Ted says, George, if we make this film, and he had never read the script, no idea, will we be doing you a favor? And George says, yes, you would. He said, okay, we'll do it then. And George stopped saying bad things about Warner Brothers. And so therefore, all of a sudden, we had a movie now. We had Warner's 50% with Towa Fuji. So then Madame Mishima approached the right wing people for whom Mishima was a god. And the right wing in Japan is not actually a wing, it's the main building. And she said, these gaijin are going to violate the memory of Mishima-san, and they must be stopped. So the guy from Fuji Television meets with Mata, and he said, I know that we promised to finance this film. Well, the situation has changed now, and we can no longer do that. Now, Mata has his whole fortune, his company, his life is rolled into this film. He's got a couple of kids, a wife. So he says to the fellow from Fuji, said, that if you pull out, I will go bankrupt. And if I go bankrupt, I will do what I have to protect my children, which was Japanese code language for meaning if a man commits suicide, his debts are not passed on to his children. So the guy from Fuji is sitting there saying, not, oh, poor Mata is going to kill himself. So Fuji is saying, oh, my fucking career is over. I gave this man my word. I reneged. He had to kill himself. No one will ever talk to me again. And so 2 weeks later, they met in a bar in Kamakura, and they gave him $2.5 million in a briefcase in yen. And to this day, they claim not to, even though they own the film. It was shown at the Cannes Film Festival. I went to the Towa party, and I said to Madame Kawakita, who was the head, I said, I want to thank you for helping me with the film. And she said, we looked right me in the eye and said, we had nothing to do with that movie. So there it was. It was a sort of movie that was made by no one, paid for by no one, and would be seen by no one. So, anything goes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the design of the film and the structure and how that is related to Mishima's writings or his life?
Yeah. So we had this tripartite structure: Last Day, flashbacks, novels. And I was just trying to figure out how to separate them. And we had a tripartite structure, cinematic structure with a 4 chapters. So it's an intersection of 3 and 4. I said, well, and I didn't come up with this to be bold or creative. I tried to how to simplify this. How can I make this simpler? Well, the last day we'll do handheld. Flashbacks we'll do black and white. The novels, I thought at that time, because video was fairly new, we'll do VHS. And Eiko Ishioka, who was the production designer, who I had met through Francis, because she had done those posters of Apocalypse Now. And Eiko said, don't use videotape, it's terrible. He was a man of the theater. Use the techniques of the theater. Make the novels theatrical. And as soon as she said it, I knew she was right. And so then there was a question of how to theatrically convey the novels so that they didn't look like they were realistic, but also that they had a storyline and you could sort of follow them too. And so then they came up with the idea of the color coding and the theatrical sets. And very fortunately at that time, I was able to. I mean, I still don't know how I got the film financed, but I got it financed. I got it made.
How would you describe the way this film and your interest in Mishima relates to your writings about, the transcendental cinema and your thesis, which is in part about Japanese also?
Well, I mean, I said at the outset that I was interested in this Christian pathology of if I suffer enough, I will merit my own salvation. I'm going to whip myself. I'm going to crucify myself. I'm going to starve myself. I'm going to live in a monastery. And then God will see that I deserve to be saved. It's a pathology. It makes no sense, I mean, Jesus never said, I want you to suffer. But this took root and became part of our Western culture. And then I saw a parallel with MISHIMA, this fantasy that pen and sword, spirit and body, male and female, all can meet at the moment of self-inflicted and excruciating death. And it was the same thing as, the Christian fantasy of, I nail myself to a cross. So I see it now. It hooks up. I can bridge these two. And so that is where I got the hubris to do this, even though Japanese would not touch it. It is a non-subject. Then less so now, but still, it's never been shown in Japan. And the very fact that we were doing it, I remember we were in Japan. Mike Mansfield was the U.S. ambassador, and he had us to the U.S. Embassy for dinner to talk about the film. And
after or before, while you were making it?
Before we were making it. And there's just a lot of hoi polloi, Hanada Mori, and other Todanori Yoko, and other people from Japanese culture. And someone said to me, "Why are you in Tokyo?" I said, "Well, I'm making a film about Mishima Yuko." I was a little silent. Nobody said anything. And one of the people changed the subject, and the dinner went on. And I had to realize right then and there is this is a non-subject. You cannot. And even I had written I used to be a film critic. I'd written about what's his name?
Ozu?
No, not. It was a conflagration. We just mentioned him. Anyway, Ichikawa Khan. I had written a
With
thing.
the Burman Art.
Yeah, I had written a thing about Ichikawa Khan, and he wanted to meet me. We wanted to have dinner, and then he had to call up and say, "I've been told I can't come." So that was the situation. And of course, we wanted Takakura Ken, who had been the Yakuza star, who had been the star of Yakuza, the film my brother and I wrote. Takakura would have loved to have done it. And but Takakura was very much indebted to conservative politics in Japan. And he came over to my brother's place with a sword, a very rare sword. He got on his hands and knees and laid the sword down and put his head to the carpet and apologized. He said, "But I cannot be in this film." So fortunately, Ken Ogata had a reputation as being a bad boy and a troublemaker. He had done Ballad of Narayama, and he kind of relished that role, as opposed to Takakura, who was terrified of being seen as, as they say in Japan, the nail that stands up will be hammered down. And Takakura did not want to be the nail that stands up.
Was the Coppola and Lucas had just distributed or helped distributing Kurosawa's film? Was part of that connection with Japan that helped?
Yeah, that was a little bit at play.
Musha, right? Yeah.
Kagemusha. Yeah, it was. I never directly dealt with Kurosawa about it. Don Ritchie was, Don Ritchie was one of the boys' club of that and knew Mishima. And we were saying before, one of the unique things about Mishima was he had a functionally segmented life. So there was a part of him who was a family man. There was part of him who was a famous author. There was a part of him who was an international cultural figure. There was a part of him who was a militarist. There was part of him that was a homosexual. None of these boxes ever overlapped each other. So Donald Ritchie, the foremost U.S. scholar on Japanese film, who's gay, was in Mishima's literary circle. And he wanted to be in Mishima's gay circle as well. And Mishima said, no. I said, well, one or the other. And so you have a kind of functioning schizophrenic who has all these different sort of worlds which only meet in his own mind.
Do you raise your hand if you have any question? There's one here. Hold on for a mic because we're yeah.
Thank you. Is there a thread between One from the Heart theatrical sets, the theatrical sets here, and the Eiko Ishioka work on Dracula? And then feel free to ignore, but second question that I just can't not ask is, did you consider a transcendental arc in these 4 parts?
No. I would no to the last part, because transcendental art is about withholding, and this is not withholding. Eiko wanted to do the wardrobe too, And I held her back. I think it was probably the right thing because she wanted to do these theatrical sets and she wanted to do theatrical wardrobe that she did in Dracula. And I just thought that's too much. If they're going to be in these weird sets, you're going to have them have normal clothes on. And so somebody else did the wardrobe. But she did the poster. She's gone now. And in fact, a number of the people involved in this film have passed. John Bailey, the cinematographer, my brother and his wife, Ken Ogata, Eiko Shioka. The Phil Glass is still alive, and I'm still alive.
It's funny you just mentioned him. I wanted to ask you about Philip Glass, and at what stage in the process did you think that would be the way to go musically? And did you try anything else, or how did that process go? Because it obviously
the big question came down to: is it Western or is it Eastern music? And what's his name? Sakamoto wanted to do it. Raichi. He was a big artist then. And that's sort of where I was leaning. And then Tom Luddy, the producer, also gone, had produced Koyaanisqatsi with Phil Glass. And Tom said, I think this is an opera. And Phil had done several operas. He had done Einstein. He had done Satyagraha. And he had done Gandhi. I said, I think we should approach Phil as if this were an opera. So we did that. And Phil wrote the score about 45, 50 minutes long from the script, never having seen a foot of film. He wrote an opera based on the script. And of course, it didn't suit me at all. It didn't meet all of the dramatic points I needed. So I took the score, we shredded it, repeated it, lapped it, and cut it, so it had all the points. And then I sent it back to Phil, and I said, now look, I butchered your score, but it now works for film. And so he listened to it, and then he rewrote it, now knowing what all the points were. And then we recorded it. It's not electronic music. It's live orchestra in Czechoslovakia. And but it was not his first go round. He had done the Reggio thing.
There's out there.
Among my generation, I'm 25 years old. There's a resurgence in interest in Yukio Mishima, specifically his ideas about tradition and beauty, maybe mostly Sun and Steel. What do you make of this resurgence among this new generation?
I'm still trying to find you.
It's in the back there.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, Mishima-san is an evergreen. They're always going to be circling back around, just like, the conversation will never end about Dante or end about Socrates or Shakespeare. He's an evergreen of culture for many reasons, not just artistic, but also sociological. So it's one of those cases that if he falls out of favor, it'll just be a matter of time before he falls back in, because there's only one. There's never been. There have been a lot of psychopaths, a lot of crazy people, a lot of outre artists, but no one packaged it all together quite the same way he did. I don't think anyone had the choice. I don't know if it was a choice. He certainly treated it as a choice, but how can such a life be a choice?
Hello. I just wanted to ask. I feel like
Yep.
sorry. Thank you. I wonder if it's fair to say that the theme of the film is sort of about impotence and art, the combination of those two, the potential.
Impotence, you said?
Impotence. What if art is only impotent? And I'm curious if you feel that theme has played through other films of yours and how you're feeling about it now.
Well, it's a central theme in art and Western culture, the body-soul problem, the pen versus the sword. And even artists who aren't obsessed with the pen-sword dichotomy deal with it because, when does art become action? And when does action become art? And, a wolf comes out of the woods. That's realism. A wolf comes out of the woods, and there is no realism. There is no wolf. That's art. And it's that battle, you're saying, I'm imagining what it would be like what it would be like for the pen to be the sword. And I think every artist has toyed around with this. I don't think any artist has made it such an idea fixe and made it as the cause of decades of work, book after book,
Paul.
Hi, my name is Paul Davis, and I'm an artist. And I spotted two of my friends, Eiko Ishioka and Tadanori Yoko. I met both of them on their first trips to New York and knew them later in Japan, especially Yoko. He's a very close friend to this day. I went to Japan in 1974 for the first time, and I went there 30 times after that. And I saw every part of the country. I had exhibitions all over the country. I worked for Honda a little bit and other clients, but I really wondered how you managed to work so well with the Japanese, because I think my experiences were all over the place, from very difficult to very easy. But
well, first I had the family connection.
yeah,
It became my brother. We were church people, and to get out of Vietnam, he went to the church board and said, "I feel the call," which means you get sent to the missions. So he got sent to the missions. He went to Kyoto, got out of Vietnam. Better to be a missionary in Kyoto than a soldier in Vietnam. And then he met his wife, and
Was she a writer, or was she a writer? What was his wife doing?
She became a writer. I think she began as a student and then became a writer. They wrote together. They're both passed now, and so that was my entree. But he did not. His Japanese was not very good. It's not an easy language to pick up. And Checo's English was very good. And then I met Alan Poole, who's now become an established force of his own, produced Rome and Tokyo Vice and one thing after another. Well, Alan, I was asking around about who can I bring to Japan, and Alan was studying Japanese with Don Keene at Yale, and somebody said, this guy, Alan Poole, I think he's the guy. So I reached out to him, and I put him up with some Japanese people. And they called me back and they said, he's the first gaijin I have ever met who can tell jokes in Japanese. And he had lived in Nara when he was had been an exchange student since age 11 to 13. He lived in Nara and learned his Japanese there. And Al and I are still best friends. We're still working together on things. So what I did was I said, okay, Checo, you deal with the talent. Alan, you do with the crew. Because I had been studying Japanese. And I started to thought, maybe I could speak Japanese. Very quickly, I realized that the mental energy that I was spending to speak Japanese was destroying the mental energy I needed to create a film. And I just announced, no more Japanese. Ohio gozaimasu, and that is it. And so then I would talk to the actors through Checo and talk to the crew through Alan, and then, so that was how it all worked out. And it was, I didn't, looking back at it, it seems much more difficult than it did at the time. My wife was pregnant. My daughter was born in Japan. I've been living in Japan. I felt it was all so normal. And, but I hope to go back soon again. But I haven't been there in 20, 30 years, though.
As a writer, can you talk a little bit about approaching adaptation and how your theories on that influence this specific movie?
This is not really an adaptation, although there are 3 mini adaptations in it. I have adapted books. Affliction, my new film, O Canada, is also a book. Russell Banks' Last Temptation of Christ. It's a case-by-case situation. Some books open their legs for you. It just happens. They just say, you can see how they to be adapted, and some resist you. So, like Affliction, as soon as I read the book, I knew how to adapt it. Last Temptation, Marty asked me to do it. I went through the book, and I outlined or figured out. I said, "There's five different movies in this book. Which is the one I want to do?" And so I fought my way through the thicket and found the movie that I wanted to do. So when you get a book, sometimes the author has just sort of laid it out for you. And sometimes you have to reinvent it. So Affliction, which Russell Banks wrote, laid it out for me. O Canada, the new one, had to be reinvented. It's a mosaic. So I had to take the novel like a vase and let it fall and pick up the pieces at random and start to assemble them. So it's very hard to answer that question without a specific book in front of you.
Thank you very much. Hello. It seems like you familiarized yourself with like all of Mishima-san's text before you got into the making of this film. And I guess I'm wondering, all these years later, if you have revisited the texts and if that would influence you to maybe showcase other works of his within this book. And maybe second to that question would be, are these the novels that you would recommend to people who are just trying to get into Mishima?
Well, my favorite is Forbidden Colors, and that's his homosexual one. After that is King Kakuju, the Golden Pavilion, and then the tetralogy. But, you know, Mishima, it's interesting because he's becoming very, very less read now in Japan. It's just because time passes. I recently read that 20% of film students know who Warren Beatty is. I know 50 years ago, everybody knew who Warren Beatty was. And Mishima wrote in a very peculiar fashion. There's 3 alphabets in Japanese. The kanji, which is the Japanese ideograms, katakana, which is the phonetic slashes, and then there's hiragana, which is a kind of circular kind of alphabet, which comments on the 2. Now, Japanese today really don't read hiragana anymore. And Mishima used a lot of hiragana. So that the text would be in kanji and katakana, then alongside would be a whole panel of hiragana, which would comment on the text. So even for the Japanese, they have to retranslate his books because the Japanese can't read the hiragana anymore. So one of the peculiarities of the Japanese language.
We have time for one more. And there was... whose hand was there? Here, Paul.
It's a hard one to ask, really. So we have assassins all around us. People are trying to kill presidents in Europe. So that side of it, we sort of see the paranoia, but then we have the people who do self-immolation, and it seems to me that's very different, and there's something there that's closer to this pen and sword. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you go by Taxi Driver, which is my entree script, they're one and the same. This notion of self-destruction and of destruction of others, you know. And the plot of Taxi Driver is really very simple. This young man falls in love with a girl he can't have, doesn't want the girl he can have, tries to kill the father figure of one, he fails, kills the father figure of the other, and becomes a hero. You know, that's the whole story right there. You know, will it be ever thus a tout brute? You know, assassination is not going out of style. What is happening, of course, is access to technology just speeds up the process. Like when I was doing Mishima, when there was consternation there, I was outfitted with a vest, a knife-proof vest, for the first week, because they felt if someone was going to attack me, they would do it by knife. There were no guns in Japan, in Tokyo, none. Nobody had guns. Now everybody has guns. So it's just, and then that's just a difference of technology. You know, the technology of a knife versus the technology of a bullet. And one is much more conducive to depersonalized assassination. you can't really depersonalize a knife attack.
With this, I think I think it's. Thank
I'm
you.
sorry, I just one more thing.
Yeah.
Somebody told me, is Leslie Schatz here?
No, I don't see him. I invited him, but he was driving out, and I'm gonna text him to see if he can
Okay,
reach us.
apparently he lives there. He was a sound engineer, and on this film, he was working for Francis and George, primarily George, up in Lucas Valley, and the sound design in this film is in many ways pioneered by Leslie Schatz, and he was the grandfather of a whole generation of sound technicians.
And please come to more of our Booksmart, Sag Harbor Cinemas Booksmart. Tomorrow there is one wonderful fun, Don't Look Now, with Suzanne Merrill, who's here. And next week we have 2 more. So please come. It's an interesting series. Thank you.